A waitress was fired, simply for secretly handing a bowl of chicken soup to two orphan children on a freezing winter day. But what happened 20 years later will leave you speechless. Those same children returned, and what they did left the entire marketplace in stunned silence. No one could have imagined that a single bowl of soup that day would be enough to change the fate of 3 lives and uncover a truth the whole town had once been blind to. Soft sunlight filtered through the glass windows, casting a pale glow on the red vinyl stools inside a small diner nestled next to a federal bus stop. Snow blanketed the parking lot, but the day remained bright, bathed in that cold winter light that makes everything feel still and distant. Tanya Miller was wiping down the counter when the door swung open. A gust of icy wind rushed in, carrying flurries of snow and 2 children. What she did next broke every rule, but it sparked a miracle no one saw coming. She looked up and froze. A boy, around 13, stood there in a threadbare jacket with a torn shoulder, his face smudged with dirt, but his eyes unerringly alert. Clutched tightly against his side was a little girl, younger than him, wearing a pink hoodie, barefoot, her cheeks pale from the cold. No one said a word. The diner was nearly empty, just Tanya and the 2 kids. A few customers sat in the back, but no one paid attention. Tanya stepped out from behind the counter, bent down slightly, her voice softening, "Where are you 2 coming from? Is someone with you?" The boy didn't answer. He simply pulled his sister closer, his eyes guarded, like he'd already learned that grown-ups weren't always kind. Tanya understood instantly. She didn't ask again. Instead, she turned toward the kitchen, ladled a bowl of hot chicken soup, and added 2 slices of toasted bread. Her hands trembled, not from the cold, but from knowing full well she was breaking the rules. She placed the bowl on the counter, leaned over, and gently handed it to the boy, her voice quiet but steady, "Here, if you're hungry, you eat. You don't need to say a word." The boy hesitated, but the little girl looked up at Tanya. There were no tears in her eyes, only one silent question, "Am I allowed to trust this?" Finally, the boy took the bowl. He didn't say thank you, but his fingers curled tightly around it, as if holding on to something precious. The little girl whispered, "It's warm." That one sentence choked Tanya up, not because the soup was hot, but because the child already understood warmth doesn't only come from food, but from how people treat each other in the bitter cold. From behind the counter, Tanya quietly watched as the 2 children climbed onto the stools. The boy carefully broke the toast in half and gave the larger piece to his sister. They ate slowly, almost as if afraid that if they ate too fast, the moment would disappear. Outside the window, snow still fell, but inside that little diner, for now, there was just enough warmth to keep someone alive another day. What Tanya didn't know was this: 20 years later, those same children would come back, and the whole town would fall silent when they finally learned who it was they had once turned their backs on. Tanya didn't ask their names. She didn't ask why 2 children were wandering in weather like this. She simply poured a little more soup and placed a napkin next to the half-empty bowl. It was the only thing she could do in a small diner where kindness was always restrained by rules and judgmental glances. The boy ate slowly, his hand stayed locked around his little sister's under the table, as if letting go would let the cold outside seep in again. Behind the counter, Tanya glanced at the wall clock. Her shift was almost over. She couldn't let the manager see the kids. Everyone here knew the rule: feed without permission, you're out the door. But when she looked over again, the little girl had fallen asleep, her cheek resting on her brother's arm, her breathing uneven, like she hadn't slept soundly in a week. Tanya lowered her voice, trying to sound calm, "Do you 2 have anywhere to go?" The boy shook his head, then whispered, barely louder than a breath, "There's no one waiting for us." One sentence, cutting straight to the chest. Tanya looked around. The customers were gone, the kitchen was clean. She stepped out, gently placing her hand on the boy's shoulder. "If you need to stay here until it warms up, I didn't see a thing." The boy looked up for the first time. There was something in his eyes, not trust, not hope, but uncertainty, like he'd forgotten what it felt like to be allowed to stay. Tanya didn't wait for his answer. She walked to the back and pulled out the small blanket they kept for sick guests and a warm glass of milk. When she returned, the boy was still there, watching over his sister. "What are your names?" Tanya asked, her voice gentle, like a whisper over warm bread. A brief pause, then the boy replied, "I'm Eli." "She's Nina." She nodded, repeating them silently, carving them into memory. Eli. Nina. Two names lost in a winter storm. And from that moment on, Tanya knew she couldn't just be the woman who served soup and turned away when her replacement arrived. Tanya quietly walked the children to the back exit. She bent down and said softly, "I can't let you stay inside, but by the storage shed, there's a spot that blocks the wind. If you need to come back, do it. Just don't let anyone see, okay?" Eli didn't nod. He didn't say thank you. He simply tightened his grip on his sister's hand and stepped into the snow without looking back. Tanya stood there for a moment. The wind slipped through her sleeves, but her chest felt warm, like something had survived the blizzard right there inside her. She didn't need a thank you, because she understood some children's thank you is too much to ask. Surviving is all they have strength for. A few minutes later, the little girl quietly reached into her pocket and pulled out a small object. She offered it to Tanya with both hands. It was our mum's, but she's gone. I want you to have it." It was a simple cloth handkerchief, edged with worn lace. There was a pale blue L stitched into the corner, the embroidery slightly crooked, either handmade or very old. Tanya accepted it and gently smoothed out the folds. "Thank you. I'll take good care of it." For the first time, Tanya saw the little girl smile, a small smile, but bright. In the days that followed, the quiet meetings between the three of them continued, night after night. Tanya would bring leftovers that no one noticed, slices of bread, slightly bruised fruit still good to eat, reheated soup, and half a loaf of baked goods forgotten in the kitchen. She packed everything carefully, labeling each item with a pencil, as if it were a real order. No one asked, and Tanya never explained. She understood that sometimes silence is the kindest way to keep hearts from hurting more. One night, a sudden snowstorm rolled in. Tanya spent her whole shift anxious, glancing at the back door every time the wind howled. When work was over, she prepared 2 servings of hot soup, added some buttered bread, bundled up, and stepped outside. But the children didn't come. For the first time in many nights, the empty spot felt colder than the snow itself. Tanya stood there for nearly 10 minutes, then quietly turned back inside. On her way home, she clutched the food bag tightly, as if still holding on to hope. When she opened the door to her apartment, her mother was sitting under the dim yellow light, knitting a scarf. She didn't ask much, just said one thing as Tanya hung up her coat: "You can't save the whole world, but you can warm up a small corner of it." Tanya set the food down on the table and sat beside her mother. "I don't know if they'll come again, Mom. If they do, it means you helped. And if they don't, you were still someone who didn't turn away." Mrs. Ruth looked at Tanya with gentle eyes, and those simple, unadorned words left Tanya speechless. That night, she placed the old handkerchief into a small box beside her bed. She didn't know why, maybe because it was the only thing left from a nameless mother, a little girl without a last name, and one quiet moment of warmth in a frozen winter night. But Tanya knew one thing for sure: ever since she'd seen those 2 children again, she no longer felt empty at the end of her shifts. The silent nights now had a purpose. No one saw, no one knew, but it was enough to keep her going. Tanya walked into her night shift that evening, like she did every other day, but something inside her felt different. A quiet worry crept in. The snow outside had stopped falling, but the old snow had hardened into a thick, gray crust along the back walkway of the restaurant. The night before, Eli and Nina hadn't shown up. She had waited for more than 10 minutes, the warm food in her hands slowly turning cold, but only the biting wind answered her. It was the first time in many nights that the empty space beneath the awning felt like an endless silence, gnawing away at her sense of peace. She didn't tell anyone about it. Tanya wasn't the kind of person to bring personal concerns into her shift. She still wiped down each table with a damp cloth, swept the crumbs from beneath the chairs, and checked the soup station, just like always. Her hands moved with practiced ease, but every time she passed the back door, her eyes would pause for a few seconds, subconsciously searching the empty space beyond. Jessica Lang, the assistant manager, was watching from the mezzanine office. From up there, she could oversee the entire restaurant without anyone noticing, like a spider quietly spinning its web. Her blonde hair was neatly tied back, her form-fitting black pencil dress highlighted her flawless figure, and her sharp, calculating eyes seemed to assess everything and everyone. The other staff tended to keep their distance from Jessica, sensing a chill whenever she walked by. No one said it aloud, but everyone knew, Jessica didn't like sharing attention with anyone, and even more so, she couldn't stand being outshined. And Tanya, unintentionally, was someone who drew attention. Regular customers often greeted Tanya by name. Some even asked how her mother was doing. A kind farmer once brought her fresh apples from the market. Others left handwritten thank you notes on their receipts. These small gestures, rather than being appreciated, became thorns in Jessica's side. To her, true recognition came from flawless job performance, impeccable appearance, and rapid career advancement, not from what she silently called vague sentimentality or cheap acts of kindness. A few nights ago, Jessica had seen Tanya standing under the awning with the two children. She had watched Tanya open her arms to embrace them, ignoring the cold and the dirt. But through Jessica's eyes, there was no kindness in the gesture, only a burning envy and a growing sense of threat, the danger that a woman as ordinary as Tanya, through her simple actions, was being loved and appreciated more than she was, the one who worked so hard to maintain a perfect image. The night before the children stopped coming, when Tanya opened the back door again, holding the prepared food, a warm bread roll and a small container of thick vegetable soup, the light from the upstairs office dimmed. Jessica had already left her post, her hand gripping a smartphone, recording. She stood hidden in the shadows near the stairwell, phone raised, eyes sharp with calculation, watching Tanya bend down to gently place the paper bag on the familiar step and then wait quietly in stillness. No one answered, no hurried footsteps, no familiar silhouette of Eli or Nina. That same heavy emptiness settled over her again. Tanya let out a quiet sigh, soft but full of disappointment, then placed the food into a sealed plastic container and turned to go back inside. But it was all Jessica needed. Even without the children showing up, the moment Tanya set the food down had been captured perfectly. The next day, when Tanya arrived for her shift, the atmosphere inside the restaurant felt oddly cold, not the kind of cold that comes with winter, but the kind that fills a room when something is wrong. Robert Manning, the owner, sat at the bar, flipping through a menu mindlessly, not really looking at it. Jessica stood beside him, phone in hand, glancing at Tanya with a smug smile. "Tanya, come here." For a moment, Manning's voice was low but not warm, every word felt like a cold stone dropped on the floor. Tanya set her apron on the counter and walked over. A ripple of unease crept down her spine, but she kept her face calm. Before she could ask anything, Jessica held out her phone. The screen showed a video. Tanya crouched near the back door, placing a food bag on the snowy ground. No words, just action. The clip was long enough to suggest something suspicious, short enough to erase any hint of compassion. "Explain this," Manning said, his tone didn't change, his eyes stayed fixed on the screen. Tanya looked at the video, then raised her gaze, meeting her boss's judging eyes and Jessica's triumphant smirk. Her voice was steady, trying to hold on to reason. "It was leftover food. I gave it to two kids left outside in the cold. They didn't ask for anything. I didn't want it to go to waste." "You treat restaurant supplies like they're yours," Manning interrupted, his patience clearly gone. "We are a business, Tanya, not a charity. You've misunderstood your role here." Jessica tilted her head slightly, that same fake smile still on her lips, her tone gentle, as if she were sharing an unfortunate truth. "I don't think she meant to do any harm, sir." She probably just felt sorry for someone. But if customers find out, especially rumors about leftovers being handed out, it could seriously damage Golden Fork's reputation. Her words were like gasoline poured on a fire, twisting Tanya's kindness into a threat against the bottom line. Frustration rose in Tanya. She couldn't accept that her actions were being distorted like this. She cut in, her voice lower now, firm, I wasn't feeling sorry. I just didn't want to see two kids faint from the cold behind this kitchen in the dead of winter. That food was going to be thrown out. You know that. The room fell quiet. The tension was suffocating. Manning stood up, adjusted the collar of his suit jacket with finality. You don't get to make that decision, Tanya. For any reason, this is a serious breach of our policy, and unfortunately, Tanya, you'll have to leave, effective immediately. No further discussion. Tanya didn't move. She didn't cry, didn't plead, didn't say another word in her defense. Her face was pale, but her eyes held their pride. She simply bowed her head, accepting the injustice. There was no need to argue. The truth of what had happened was enough for her. Jessica walked her all the way to the front door. Just before Tanya stepped out, she leaned in, barely audible, and whispered with cruel satisfaction, you never deserved to be looked at the way they looked at you, Tanya. That kind of respect, it's meant for people like me. Tanya paused for just a second, clenched her fists, but didn't look back. She opened the door and stepped out. The chill of the late winter evening swept in, but it didn't sting as much as what she left behind, betrayal and the merciless extinguishing of something good. It wasn't being fired that hurt most. It was the way something quiet and kind had been twisted, misunderstood, and turned into wrongdoing by those in power. On her walk home, snow had begun to fall again. The soft, white flakes settled on Tanya's hair and shoulders, melting almost instantly. She passed through a familiar alleyway, past the old bakery and the laundromat. Inside her worn coat pocket, her hand clutched the little handkerchief Nina had once given her, now wrinkled, but still faintly scented with that old fabric smell, a fragile keepsake in the midst of the storm. She didn't know if she'd ever see those two children again. She didn't know what she'd do tomorrow. But she knew one thing with absolute certainty, if she could go back in time, she would do the exact same thing. Because some actions, even if they cost us everything, even if they're misunderstood or labeled as wrong, are still worth doing, and still worth bearing the silence of injustice, because the value of kindness has never depended on someone else's approval. The night she was fired, Tanya quietly walked through the narrow alley between two rows of aging brick buildings, the cold seeping through her worn coat into her very bones. She made her way on foot back to the small apartment where Ruth, her mother, was waiting. There were no words left to say, just a sinking feeling that the world she once believed in, once served faithfully, had slammed its door in her face without warning. When Tanya stepped inside, the dim light from an old floor lamp cast a soft glow over Ruth's frail frame, seated in her armchair. Her trembling hands were still knitting a scarf for the coming winter. Her vision had faded some, but she still looked up when the door creaked open, "You're home." Her voice was low, yet tried to hold on to its familiar gentleness. Tanya took off her coat, hung it neatly on the hook, then walked over to her mother. She sat down and gently took Ruth's hand in hers. "I got fired, Mom." Ruth's hand stopped. The yarn slipped from her needles and fell to the floor. No scolding, no long, weary sigh, just a quiet look, sad, but not surprised. The kind of sadness only a mother knows, one who's seen her daughter let down too many times. "I didn't do anything wrong, Mom." "You know that," Tanya said, her voice more a whisper to herself than anything else. Ruth didn't answer. She simply reached out and brushed her daughter's hair back, a simple gesture, but it held all the love, worry, and helplessness a mother could feel. In the days that followed, Tanya began her job search again. With over 8 years of experience as a line cook, she believed she could land a new position somewhere, even something small. She updated her resume, printed out a few copies, and started knocking on doors at restaurants all over Glenmere. At first, the interviews seemed promising. Many restaurant managers were impressed when she mentioned her work at Golden Fork. They nodded, smiled, even shook her hand. "Your background looks great. We'll be in touch soon." But no one ever called. Tanya started to feel something wasn't right. At the 5th place, the 6th, the 10th, the once welcoming faces turned distant. Some shop owners even avoided eye contact when she walked in. One afternoon, she stepped into the Daily Grind, a small cafe she used to frequent, clinging to her last shred of hope. Martha, the owner, was a kind-hearted woman in her 60s, always smiling when she refilled Tanya's coffee. "Martha, I heard you're looking for a barista. I have some experience." Martha looked at her, not with the usual warmth, but with a conflicted mix of sympathy and hesitation. "Tanya, I'm really sorry. There's been talk. I don't know what's true or not, but you know how business is." Martha's words felt like a soft blade. She didn't have to say more. Tanya understood, something had tainted her name, and it was spreading faster than she could keep up with. At that very moment, across town in a sleek, modern apartment, Jessica Lang sat with her phone in hand, typing into Glenmuir's local Facebook community group. The profile picture belonged to a burner account, some fake name, no mutual friends. The post read, "Be cautious about hiring Tanya M., formerly at Golden Fork. Word is, she got fired for stealing food to give to random kids. What kind of weird charity is that? Think twice before hiring." Attached was a blurry photo, Tanya holding a food bag, stepping out of the back kitchen at Golden Fork one snowy night. Jessica didn't name her outright, but in a town like Glenmuir, everyone knew exactly who it was. Frank Delaney, the silent accomplice, played his role to perfection. He was often seen around the local farmers' market, tossing out barbed comments whenever Tanya's name came up. "Word is, that girl got fired for sneaking stuff out of the kitchen, pretending to be all kind and noble. Who knows where that food ended up? Probably sold it off somewhere." At the cobbler's shop, the pharmacy, the gas station, rumors caught like dry grass in the wind, flaring up from half-told tales and whispered assumptions. And in the small town of Glenmuir, the scariest thing wasn't what was true or false, it was what people wanted to believe. Tanya didn't even know what she was fighting against, only that each passing day, another door slammed shut in her face. She spent her days wandering in the biting wind, clutching a folder of resumes, passing by restaurant after restaurant, big and small. Everywhere, the looks were the same, evasive or filled with doubt. One late afternoon, just as the sun dipped behind the buildings, Tanya found herself back in a familiar place, the narrow alley behind Golden Fork. She still carried a bag of bread and milk, just like she always did, but there was no one there. No Eli, no Nina. The empty space beneath the stairs where they always sat was cold and bare. Tanya sat down on the concrete steps, the bag still full in her hands. She waited 10 minutes, 30, an hour. No one came. The next day, and the day after that, still no sign of the children. Had they been taken away, caught, or had something happened? No one knew their real names. No one had ever asked, not even Tanya. Then, one day, wandering near an abandoned warehouse, she spotted a scrap of paper stuck in the brambles. It was a pencil drawing, rough, uneven lines, but she recognized it instantly. It was the sketch Nina had once shown her, the three of them huddled beside a snowbank, with a small handkerchief blowing in the wind. Tanya clutched the paper in her hands, suddenly trembling. She sat alone in the dim light, the wind howling through the cracks in the window frame. The old stove had long gone cold, and the little house felt as frozen as her heart. Outside, the snow began to fall again. Once more, Tanya stood in the snow in the back alley behind Golden Fork, the soft glow of the kitchen light casting a faint silhouette across her back. No sound of small footsteps, no quiet hello, only silence and the creeping sense of being forgotten, a kind soul shut out, a giver left with nothing to hold on to. And the most frightening thing of all wasn't being misunderstood. It was knowing that no one wanted to understand. 20 years had passed since the night Tanya was fired from Golden Fork, the night not just one restaurant door, but the entire town of Glenmere slammed shut in her face. After losing her job, Tanya tried to start over. She married David, a kind-hearted plumber, but just 3 years later, he died in a workplace accident. They never had the chance to start a family. Before the grief could even settle, her mother, Ruth, fell seriously ill and passed away after a long period of being bedridden. Tanya was left with nothing, no family, no job, and nowhere she truly felt welcome. She took on odd jobs in distant towns, hoping to avoid the judgmental stares back in Glenmere. Her tarnished reputation followed her everywhere. Every door she knocked on closed in her face, not because she lacked skill, but because of a single false rumor. But no matter how many times life knocked her down, Tanya quietly stood back up, because in her heart, there was still one thing worth holding on to, something her mother once told her: the only way out of the darkness is to light a candle. Tanya left the rundown apartment complex in the heart of Glenmere. She no longer wanted to live in the shadow of Golden Fork and all the painful memories attached to it. She moved to an even older neighborhood, where cracked brick streets wove between weathered homes stacked close together. It was where struggling workers, the unhoused, and those just getting by tried to make it through the day. And it was the first place Tanya truly felt she belonged. With the little money she had, Tanya rented a small corner space in a dilapidated old building. It used to be an abandoned laundromat, damp, dusty, and long forgotten. She cleaned it up herself, painted the walls, scrubbed the floors, and arranged some worn-out wooden tables and chairs she had picked up from second-hand stores. She worked tirelessly from dawn until nightfall, driven by a quiet, burning resolve. At last, she hung a simple wooden sign she had carved by hand: Good Spoon. Good Spoon was born quietly, no grand opening, no announcements. It wasn't a fancy restaurant. It was a small kitchen, a tiny flame in life's cold darkness. In the beginning, Tanya served hot soup and bread, free of charge, to the homeless and low-income families in the neighborhood. She didn't have much capital, but she believed that as long as she gave it her all, things would turn out okay. Every morning, she went to the market herself, picking the freshest ingredients she could afford and lovingly cooked every pot of soup and baked each tray of bread. The first people to walk through Good Spoon's door were bearded men with tired eyes, thin women worn down by life, and children with smudged faces and hungry bellies. They didn't come for a wide menu or polished service. They came for the warm aroma of soup drifting through the door and for Tanya's quiet kindness that never judged. No one was asked who they were or what brought them there. If they were hungry, Tanya fed them. Little by little, word spread. Good Spoon became a safe haven for those down on their luck. It wasn't just a place to eat, it was a place where people felt seen, welcomed, and treated with dignity. Some began donating what little they had, maybe a few coins or a bundle of vegetables from their backyard, to help Tanya keep the kitchen going. Those who couldn't afford to give money helped in other ways: cleaning, washing dishes, painting the walls. Good Spoon became more than a soup kitchen. It became a small community center, a place where kindness spread naturally, like warmth from a well-tended fire. On a simple white wall inside the shop, Tanya had hung a small photograph. It was an old picture of her mother, Ruth, smiling gently, her eyes filled with warmth. Right next to it, pressed inside a modest glass frame, was an old handkerchief, faded and worn, that Nina had given her years ago. The stitches had frayed, the fabric dulled with time, but it remained an irreplaceable keepsake, a quiet reminder of why she began all of this in the first place. One afternoon, a skinny boy in tattered clothes stepped into the Good Spoon. He stared at the steaming bowl of soup Tanya placed in front of him, his wide eyes filled with fear and hunger. He didn't speak. He simply lowered his head and began to eat, spoon by spoon, slowly and silently. Tanya sat down beside him, watching him eat. "You don't owe me anything," she said gently, her voice full of understanding. "Just, if someone's hungry someday, remember today." The boy looked up, a little confused at first, but then he nodded. It was a quiet moment, but a powerful one. Kindness doesn't need a spotlight or applause. It only needs to be given to those who need it, with the hope that someday it will be passed on. In the corner of Tanya's tiny kitchen, a small flame still flickered, warming the forgotten souls of Glenmere. 20 years had passed. Good Spoon was no longer just a small, lonely kitchen tucked away on the edge of town. It had become a solid refuge for the struggling residents of Glenmere, a place people came not just to fill an empty stomach, but to receive kindness without judgment. A black and white photo of Miss Ruth, smiling beside the fireplace, hung proudly near the glass wall where the menu was posted, right next to a faded handkerchief that once belonged to little Nina. To Tanya, that wasn't just a memory. It was a reminder: keep going as you did on the very first day, no matter what life throws at you. She worked quietly, like a lone lamplighter on a forgotten street, not seeking recognition, only hoping not to be misunderstood. But in today's world, kindness is often the first thing targeted. 3 weeks earlier, at a charity gala in the neighboring city, Jessica Lang was posing gracefully in front of a backdrop printed with the logo of her new restaurant chain, Lang & Company. She wore an elegant white dress, a polished smile, and the title, Compassionate Businesswoman of the Year, awarded by Local Vision magazine. After the event, sitting in her private car, curling her hair and scrolling through Twitter, Jessica froze when she saw a post tagged #KindnessWins. It was a photo taken from a distance, a middle-aged woman serving free soup to the homeless in the snow. Behind her was a hand-painted sign, Good Spoon, just help, don't ask. The caption read, I was once a homeless kid. If it weren't for Miss Tanya and Good Spoon, I might not even be alive to write this. My sister and I grew up on those bowls of soup. We've built a stable life now. Thank you, kind woman. Never forget, kindness saved us. Posted by Eli Thompson. Jessica's fingers froze. Tanya. The name stabbed through her mind like a thorn. Memories she had long buried beneath layers of makeup, contracts, and spotlight came flooding back, along with an irritation she thought she'd left behind years ago. Tanya, the one who caused her influence within the Golden Fork Group, the one who was praised even though she was just a lowly kitchen worker, the one who somehow still existed. Jessica gripped her phone. How could that tiny name from that forgotten corner of town suddenly be hailed as a symbol of kindness? Unacceptable. There was no way Tanya could be seen as a role model while Jessica had spent years clawing her way back up, even fabricating truths just to repair her public image. She dialed Frank Delaney, her loyal, silent arm for years. I want Tanya Miller's name off Google, off social media, all buried so deep it never comes back up. 3 weeks later, one morning, as Tanya was preparing a pot of potato soup for a group of newly arrived orphans staying near the shop, Mary, a single mother who often stopped by for food, entered the kitchen, her face uneasy. Tanya, have you seen what's on the internet? Tanya, who rarely used a smartphone, shook her head. Mary handed her the phone. The screen lit up with a bold, venomous headline, Good Spoon, Charity Kitchen or Breeding Ground for Food Poisoning. The article appeared on a well-known community forum, written in a tone so sharp and suspiciously detailed it raised eyebrows. It described several suspected food poisoning cases after dining at Good Spoon, but worse, far worse, was the spotlight it cast on the cafe owner's shadowy past, previously fired for theft and fraud at Golden Fork. The article had no byline, but at the very end, the sharing credit was clear, shared by Jessica Lang. Within just a few hours, the post spread like wildfire. The hashtag #GoodSpoonScam flooded Twitter and Facebook, dragging in a storm of harsh comments, utterly disappointed, fake kindness, huh? Knew something shady was going on. Anonymous accounts began piling on, claiming things like, saw rats in there once, or, my relative had stomach pains after eating there, even though Tanya had never seen any of them before. That evening, Good Spoon became a media target. Reporters stood outside with cameras. A team of health inspectors entered with stern faces, checking every spice jar, every napkin, every corner of the kitchen. Miss Tanya, can you explain the food poisoning allegations? Is it true you were fired from Golden Fork for misappropriating food? Some claim you exploited people's sympathy to raise questionable funds. What's your response? Tanya stood there in her own kitchen, forcing her hands to stay still. She answered calmly, truthfully, with nothing to hide, I'm fully willing to cooperate with any investigation. I have nothing to conceal. She didn't lash out, she didn't yell, she didn't beg for understanding, because she knew the truth never needed to be shouted. But inside, the old hurt, that once bleeding wound, began to ache again. It was a gloomy afternoon. Rain tapped gently against the shop's awning as Tanya wiped down the counter. A sleek black car pulled up across the street. The window rolled down. Jessica Lange, clad in an expensive suit, turned her head to glance toward Good Spoon. She didn't step out. She was mid-interview, surrounded by reporters, praising her new social enterprise. Cameras swirled, LED lights flashed, and in that glow, Jessica raised her hand and waved at Tanya. It wasn't a greeting, it was a declaration of victory. A polite, venom-laced smile curled on Jessica's lips, picture perfect, just like every shot she posted on Instagram. But her eyes were like blades, sharper than any glare, colder than Glenmuir's early winter mist. Looks like you're not getting back up this time, Tanya. Jessica didn't say it out loud, but Tanya heard it clearly, painfully, in her mind. She turned quietly, eyes resting on the kitchen behind her, the very place that had once offered hope to so many, now stood surrounded by suspicion, by harsh questions, and by one woman pulling all the strings from behind the scenes. But Tanya would not fall, because kindness doesn't need an audience, and justice sometimes only requires a bowl of hot soup at the right moment, a decent gaze, and a truth that cannot be silenced. Jessica Lange's smear campaign and the rumors that spread across social media had swift and devastating consequences. Not long after Jessica's post went viral, a temporary suspension order was issued against Good Spoon. Health inspectors completed their review, and although they found no concrete evidence of food poisoning or any serious violations, the pressure from public opinion, combined with Tanya's so-called history, was enough to force their hand. The wooden doors of Good Spoon, once a symbol of hope and warmth, were now sealed shut with an official notice taped across them. The media didn't let up. Reporters lingered outside regularly, cameras pointed at the closed shop, running stories about a food poisoning scandal and casting doubt on the sincerity of kindness. Tanya Miller's name, along with Good Spoon, was repeated over and over in local newscasts and online threads, often accompanied by harsh labels like fraud, immoral, and repeat offender. What hurt Tanya more than anything was the change in attitude from her own neighbors, people she had helped, people who had once received warm bowls of soup and free loaves of bread when they were hungry, had begun to turn their backs on her. At first, a few stopped by to show support, but as the media pressure mounted and the rumors grew louder, their visits slowed and then stopped altogether. The grateful eyes she once knew now looked at her with suspicion and fear. People avoided Tanya when she walked by, no more smiles, no more small talk on the sidewalk. The neighborhood that had once felt so full of compassion now felt colder than the harshest winter. And once again, loneliness wrapped itself tightly around her. James, her kind, elderly neighbor, and one of the few who still believed in her, stopped by her apartment often. He could see it in her, the way she had withered, the way sadness never left her eyes. "Tanya," he said one afternoon as they sat in her small apartment, watching soft snow begin to fall outside the window, "you have to speak up. You have to tell them the truth, what you did for Eli and Nina all those years ago, how you were wrongfully fired, and what Jessica Lange is doing to you now. They'll understand." Tanya shook her head gently, her eyes drifted toward the distance, and her voice was calm but heavy with quiet resignation. "If they believe me, James, I wouldn't need to explain. And if they don't, no matter what I say, they won't listen. They'll just look for more reasons to doubt." Her words weren't defeat, they were a painful acceptance of human nature and of how hard it is to defend kindness when it's been twisted. She had lived through this once before with Golden Fork, and now history seemed to be repeating itself, only this time, crueler. Despair closed in around Tanya. She felt exhausted, physically, yes, but more than that, emotionally worn thin. She had tried so hard, rebuilt her life from the rubble, only to watch it crumble again under the weight of lies and envy. She remembered those cold nights years ago, standing alone in the snow after being fired. That feeling of loneliness was hauntingly familiar. One night, during the worst of the snowstorm, as the wind howled through the cracks in her window like the cries of pain itself, Tanya reached for the small wooden box where she kept her mother's keepsakes. She pulled out an old handkerchief that Nina had once given her. The fabric was faded, the embroidered threads fraying, but it remained a symbol of something deeply rooted, a reminder of what she had done and the people whose lives she had touched. Tanya gently smoothed the handkerchief, feeling the worn softness beneath her fingers. Tears began to roll down her cheeks, not out of self-pity, but from worry for Eli and Nina. Where were they now? Were they safe? Would they ever know that the woman who once helped them was now facing terrible accusations? She carefully folded the handkerchief and placed it back into the wooden box. The soft click of the lid closing echoed like a quiet sorrow in the stillness of the room. And yet, in the middle of everything falling apart, a few things quietly endured. Each evening, a frail old woman continued to leave a small bundle of fresh vegetables by the back door. She said nothing, just bowed her head silently when she crossed paths with Tanya in the dark. One morning, an old donation box appeared again on the doorstep. Inside was a small scrap of paper, scrawled in a child's handwriting, "I don't know if you did anything wrong, but I miss your chocolate cake." Tucked beside it were a few coins and a single peppermint candy. Tanya held the candy in her hand for a long time. She had no idea who the child was, perhaps just one of the hundreds who had come through over the years. But that one small act, quiet, expecting nothing, rekindled a flame inside her, tiny, but not yet extinguished. Spring had finally arrived in Glenmere, bringing with it the first warm rays of sunshine after a long and bitter winter. The snow had melted, leaving behind shimmering puddles and bare branches that had just begun to bud. But for Tanya, spring offered no sense of hope. Good Spoon remained sealed shut, its wooden door closed and rotting a little more each day, an unrelenting reminder of failure and injustice. The rumors and accusations spread by Jessica Lang had rooted deeply into the minds of the townspeople. Tanya, once beloved, was now treated like an outcast. Every time she stepped out of her worn-down apartment, she felt the stares, the hurried glances away, the whispered comments behind her back. No one believed in her kindness anymore. That morning, Tanya made herself go outside. The carton of milk in the fridge was empty, and her mother had once taught her, no matter what happens, never let yourself or your mother go hungry. She tried to walk quickly, head down, avoiding eye contact, but words were harder to dodge. As she passed the produce stand, an older woman, once a regular at Golden Fork, turned her back sharply and muttered to the person next to her, "Such a phony do-gooder." A man nearby, who used to accept free soup from Good Spoon in its early days, gave her a look filled with suspicion, then spit on the ground. Each word, each glance, each act of rejection felt like a blade to Tanya's chest. She felt exposed, stripped bare beneath the weight of public judgment. The whispers had cast her as a villain, and the loneliness, the shame, it had never cut this deep. She wanted to vanish, to bury herself beneath the damp spring soil and never come back up. Just as Tanya felt she couldn't take another step, as she weaved through the crowd with red eyes and a heart too heavy to carry, a sleek black luxury car suddenly pulled up in front of the grocery store across the street. The soft hiss of the brakes sliced through the tense air like a thunderclap in her ears. All eyes in the market turned toward the vehicle. The rear door opened. A tall, successful-looking man in a tailored suit stepped out. The pale spring sunlight fell across his face, and Tanya felt a strange jolt of recognition in those deep, dark eyes. He looked directly at her, a warm, beaming smile spreading across his face. Then, stepping out behind him came a young woman, her long brown hair neatly tied back, her outfit sharp and professional. There was no attempt to hide the emotion in her gaze. Her large, shining eyes looked at Tanya with unmistakable tenderness. They walked straight toward Tanya without hesitation. Each step they took seemed to carry an invisible force, pushing back the haze of suspicion that hung in the air. The crowd began to quiet, curiosity overtaking judgment. "Miss Tanya," the man said, his voice low and steady, filled with something close to joy. It sliced through the silence like sunlight breaking through clouds. Tanya stood frozen in place. She stared at them, trying to reconcile the image of two thin, shivering children huddled behind the restaurant kitchen all those years ago with the successful, grown individual standing before her now. A name buried deep in her memory flashed back with sudden clarity. Eli. Tanya gasped, her voice trembling uncontrollably. She turned to the young woman beside him, whose eyes still held the same striking innocence. "Nina." The man's face broke into a radiant smile. "Yes, it's us, Miss Tanya. You're Eli and Nina." The two of them stepped forward, no further explanation, no hesitation. Eli opened his arms wide. Tanya didn't pause for even a second. She rushed into his embrace, a hug full of strength, of emotion that had been suppressed for so many years, feeling the warmth and steady presence of the man he had become. Then Nina stepped in too, wrapping her now-grown arms around Tanya from behind, holding her tight. The three of them stood in the middle of the marketplace, surrounded by stunned and silent onlookers, enveloped in a wave of emotion too powerful for words. It was more than just a reunion, it was a silent vindication, a moment of justice for a wounded soul. As they gently let go, Eli held Tanya's shoulders firmly, his gaze steady and full of respect. He looked directly into her eyes, then turned toward the shocked crowd gathered around them. "We're not here to say thank you, Miss Tanya," Eli said, his voice warm and clear, carrying through the unnaturally quiet air. He spoke with conviction, not just for her, but for everyone watching. "We're here to say you were right, even when the whole world was wrong. We never forgot what you did for us. You gave us more than food. You gave us hope. You gave us faith that good people still exist, even when every other door had shut." Those words lifted a weight from Tanya's chest, one she had carried alone for years, years of loneliness, of blame, of being misunderstood and cast aside. And now, with just a few simple, heartfelt words, it all seemed to melt away. Her tears began to fall, soft and steady, but they were not tears of pain. They were tears of release, of deep, overwhelming joy. She looked into Eli and Nina's eyes and saw not just gratitude, but strength, a quiet promise of justice. Nina, the little girl from all those years ago, was now a beautiful young woman, yet her gentle, childlike smile remained. She handed Tanya a carefully wrapped cloth. "This is mine, but I want you to have it back," Nina said tenderly, her voice full of love, as if making up for all the years they'd been apart. "We found out what really happened, and we came home this time to clear your name. Please, trust us." Tanya accepted the bundle and gently unwrapped it. Inside was a watercolor painting, meticulously done, full of feeling. It wasn't grand or elaborate, but it portrayed a scene so familiar it hurt: a woman bending down to offer a bag of bread to two small children, huddled in the snow under the dim yellow light outside a restaurant. It was Tanya, and it was Eli and Nina, just as they had been. The painting was Nina's work, a living memory captured forever, a testimony far more powerful than words. Nina's old handkerchief, the only keepsake Tanya had held on to all these years, now came alive through that painting. It was no longer just a distant memory, it had become living proof that kindness doesn't need an audience, that a single act of compassion can leave a mark on someone's soul forever. Tanya's heart overflowed. She no longer felt alone, no longer abandoned. The kindness she had once given quietly, without recognition, had now returned to her with more power than she ever imagined. And it came back in front of the very people who once turned their backs on her. It was a reversal she never dared dream of, a miraculous moment of justice and gratitude paid back in full. The next morning, the air in Glenmere was thick with anticipation. News of Eli and Nina's return and their emotional reunion with Tanya had spread like wildfire. The townspeople, many of whom had once turned their backs on Tanya, now found themselves feeling uneasy, guilty, and above all, curious. They sensed something big was about to happen. Eli, with the urgency of a successful man accustomed to solving problems, quickly wasted no time organizing a press conference at the Glenmere Town Hall. He didn't want any delays. Justice for Tanya had already been delayed far too long. Nina stood beside him, her eyes never leaving Tanya, who sat in the front row next to James and a few rare, loyal friends. Tanya appeared unusually calm, as if she were fully prepared for whatever was coming, good or bad. The town hall was packed. It wasn't just local reporters in attendance, but also major news outlets from nearby cities, drawn by the viral story of kindness misunderstood and gratitude repaid that was lighting up social media. Jessica Lange was there too. She sat in the front row, directly across from Tanya, her face still wearing its usual cold and haughty expression, though a hint of tension flickered in her eyes. Frank Delaney, the former chef at Golden Fork, had slipped into the back of the hall, trying to blend in with the crowd. Eli stepped up to the podium, facing a sea of cameras and microphones. He didn't waste words. His voice was clear, firm, and carried the weight of a man who had built his life from the ground up. "Ladies and gentlemen," Eli began, sweeping his gaze slowly across the room, "my name is Eli Johnson. This is my sister, Nina. 20 years ago, on a cold day here in Glenmere, we were two homeless orphans with nowhere to go, until a woman gave us each a bowl of chicken soup at the Golden Fork. No one else knew we were there. No one asked. But one woman did. Her name is Tanya Miller." He paused, looking towards Tanya with a warm smile spreading across his face. Tanya gave a gentle nod in return. Tanya gave us food, she gave us warmth, but more importantly, she gave us hope. She did it quietly, never asking for recognition or reward. And for that act of kindness, she was fired, her name dragged through the mud, and this very town turned its back on her. Even after she rebuilt her life with the Good Spoon Diner, her kindness was attacked once again. Today, we are here to set the record straight. Eli gave a signal. A large screen dropped down behind him, and a video began to play. The footage, taken from a hidden security camera, showed Frank Delaney, the former chef of Golden Fork, sneaking into the Good Spoon late at night and pouring a liquid chemical into its plumbing system. It was the night before the food poisoning rumors spread. The footage was clear, undeniable. A low murmur rippled through the crowd. "This video," Eli said, his voice now sharper, firmer, "was obtained by our legal team from a hidden surveillance camera we installed after receiving a tip about a plot to sabotage Good Spoon. This is the proof that there was no food poisoning. This was a deliberate act of sabotage meant to destroy Miss Tanya's reputation." Instantly, all eyes turned toward Frank Delaney, whose face had gone pale as he tried to slip deeper into the crowd. "And the person behind this scheme wasn't acting alone," Eli continued, his gaze shifting toward Jessica Lange. "The woman who ignited this smear campaign, who weaponized the media and social platforms to ruin the life of a good woman, was Miss Jessica Lange." Just as Eli finished speaking, a well-dressed man in a black suit stepped up to the podium. It was Marcus Green, a prominent district attorney. He didn't say much, just held up a thick folder and a cell phone. "I'm Marcus Green, here on behalf of the district attorney's office," he said calmly, yet with unmistakable authority. "Based on the evidence presented, our office has officially issued charges against Frank Delaney for criminal sabotage and endangering public health. Additionally, during our investigation, we uncovered a series of emails and text messages linking Miss Jessica Lange to the launch and coordination of the #GoodSpoonScam smear campaign, with clear intent to damage both the reputation of the Good Spoon and Miss Tanya Miller." Marcus Green held up his phone. On the screen was a chain of emails and messages from Jessica, detailing how to craft smear pieces, how to spread rumors, and how to create fake accounts to amplify the negativity. The murmuring in the hall erupted into angry uproar. Reporters surged forward, microphones aimed straight at Jessica. Jessica Lange, once proud and polished, could no longer hold her composure. Her face turned pale, her eyes wide with shock and fury. She shot up from her seat, knocking the chair over with a loud crash. "No, that's not me. You're framing me. This is a setup. Eli Johnson, you're out for revenge." She screamed, her voice shrill, cracking under the weight of panic. You've always been like this, Tanya. Always pretending to be saintly, always loved by everyone for doing absolutely nothing. Jessica whipped around toward Tanya, her face twisted in raw envy, no longer hiding her bitterness. "I worked hard. I studied. I clawed my way up, and you just stood there, doing little things, and everyone adored you. Customers liked you more than me. The boss looked at you differently. You never deserved it." She lunged toward Tanya, eyes wild. "Do you even know how jealous I was of you? Even when you fed those kids, I found it disgusting. I hated the way people looked at you with respect, the kind of look I've never gotten, not once in my life. You're fake, you're—" Before she could finish, security had already stepped in, restraining her. Jessica flailed, screaming uncontrollably, but no one was listening anymore. She had exposed herself entirely. The eyes that once held suspicion or anger now looked at her with only disgust and pity. No one came to her defense. Throughout Jessica's frenzied tirade, Tanya sat still, saying nothing. She didn't flinch, she didn't defend herself, no angry outburst, no look of triumph, just silence. She simply looked at Jessica. Tanya's gaze was calm, absent of judgment, absent of smugness, just a quiet stillness that was hard to define. It was a look born of deep understanding and compassion for a heart slowly corroded by envy. And it was that look, peaceful, steady, and forgiving, from the very woman Jessica had tried so hard to destroy, that finally broke her. Every defense crumbled, the insults died in her throat. Jessica broke down in tears, not from fear of punishment, but from overwhelming shame. She collapsed, undone by the raw truth and Tanya's unspoken grace. Justice had been served, no shouting, no arguments, just the truth standing firm, speaking for itself, louder than any accusation ever could. Tanya had been vindicated, not by her own words, but by undeniable evidence and the actions of the very people she once chose to help. 1 month after the explosive press conference at Glenmere City Hall, life gradually settled back into its rhythm, but nothing was quite the same. Tanya's reputation had been fully restored, brighter and stronger than ever before. News of her story, of Eli and Nina, had spread across the country, becoming a symbol of misunderstood kindness and justice finally served. Frank Delaney had been arrested and was awaiting trial. Jessica Lang, shaken by the events at the press conference, found herself under internal investigation for unfair competition and defamation. Naturally, her once flawless career had completely unraveled. As for Eli and Nina, their lives had changed forever since that cold winter night. After receiving help from Tanya, they lost contact with her for a time, until they were taken in by an older woman named Janet. Miss Janet, who had no children of her own, was moved by the siblings' story and their unbreakable bond. Seeing their resilience and love for each other, she made the decision to adopt them. Miss Janet gave them a true home, the best education possible, and above all, unconditional love. Eli attended top-tier schools and nurtured his natural gift for business. Through hard work and constant learning, he eventually became a successful entrepreneur in the tech industry. Nina, with her sensitive soul and innate artistic talent, was raised to become a gifted painter, her canvases brimming with feeling and stories. But despite the comfort and privilege they later enjoyed, Eli and Nina never forgot Tanya. They never forgot that bitterly cold night, the warm loaf of bread, or the gentle embrace of a stranger. Tanya's story, the handkerchief Nina gave her, and the painting of that snowy evening remained powerful reminders of their roots and the selfless kindness that saved their lives. Even after Miss Janet passed away 2 years ago, leaving them a substantial inheritance, their hearts still held one shared longing, to find Tanya again and repay her. And now, they had finally done it. 1 month after the press conference, Good Spoon reopened its doors, but it was no longer the humble little diner it once was. Under Eli and Nina's sponsorship and close care, the place had been transformed into a spacious, modern community center, yet it still preserved the warmth and friendliness that had always defined it. The walls were freshly painted, the kitchen upgraded with brand new equipment, and a larger communal space was designed not only to serve meals but also to host gatherings and skill-building classes for the underprivileged. Tanya's life had been filled with hardships, losses, and countless misunderstandings, but now she found healing in the very place she had once created, in the bonds she had formed with the lives she quietly touched. Good Spoon was no longer just a diner. It had become a living testament that kindness, though it asks for no praise, always finds a way to grow, to spread, and to change the world, little by little, heart by heart. Tanya continues her work quietly, steadfastly, and with deep compassion, because she knows that once the flame of kindness is lit, it never goes out. Have you ever met someone like Tanya in your life? Or maybe you once helped someone, and no one ever knew. Share your story below, because perhaps your quiet act of kindness changed a life in ways you never imagined.